United 11?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you talking to Clarence yet?
We're getting it now.
Okay. Is your name Clarence? Because then I could say call Clarence Clarence. I like it.
So do I.
All right. Well, hey, good morning. We're here with Ray Johnson of Marion, Indiana. Ray is the organizer of the Marion Fly-In Cruise-In, and he's also a board member of the Vintage Aircraft Association, and he has taken some time this morning to talk to us. Thank you very much, Ray, for doing that.
Well, it's good to be with you, Brandon.
Well, Ray, I tell you, for anybody that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get your start in flying?
Well, thank you. And again, Brandon, we appreciate anytime we get an opportunity to speak about the Fly-In Cruise-In. We're anxious to do that. And a little bit about myself. I grew up on a 200-acre farm about 5 miles from where I live. My uncle was a pilot, and he always had Stinsons and Fairchilds and old airplanes around. And my father wasn't a pilot, but it was my dad's brother. And when I was about 5 years old, my uncle landed his Taylorcraft in our wheat field behind the farmhouse. And I'll never forget that. Now, I didn't get an airplane ride that day, but later on, sitting on my mother's lap, I got a ride in an Aranca Defender.
Oh, wow.
And I'm telling you, it had an impression on me. I saw that little toy box down there. I thought it was a giant toy box. All I ever wanted to do was fly an airplane. So fast forward, in 1980, I got my private pilot's license. And that's how it all began. I also found my uncle had an Aranca Chief around for several years, and I knew about Aranca Chiefs. And so I bought an Aranca Chief and actually got my license in it. And I still have.
You still have?
I still have that airplane. Bought the airplane before I had a license in the fall of 1979. Still have that very same airplane today.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, you're well known with that Chief. In fact, the first time that you and I met, we were at Oshkosh, and
Okay.
your Chief was front and center near the vintage area there, and I happened to be at the time looking for. I had mine a Champ, and I ended up with one. But you were there with your airplane, and we talked a little bit about the Chief, and it's a beautiful example of one.
Well, thank you. It's been rebuilt twice, and we tried very hard to make it look original. We've customized it a little bit recently, put a 85 stroker engine in it with an STC, and it really woke up the airplane. We're really enjoying it.
And I've always heard that 85 is just about perfect for those airplanes.
I think it really is. We flew it a long time with 65, enjoyed it, but it's not about speed, it's about climb.
Oh,
But it really goes now. So
yeah, for those of us that have sat behind 65 horses of fight and fury, those trees come pretty quick.
yeah, and I found that I'm not getting any lighter, So anyway, it's working out great now.
And that was Bill Pancake that did that engine, wasn't it?
That's an STC from Bill Pancake. It allows you with the 11AC Aranca Chief to put the big engine in without the big tail. And that was a big difference. So didn't have to modify the airframe at all to put this in. So yeah,
What's
actually
different about that? I mean, originally you had to have the big tail. With the STC, you don't. What makes that okay?
Yeah, that's the big deal about this STC. He just came out with it. I actually obtained the first one. There were several Chiefs out there doing this on one-time field approvals, but it's much better to have a certified airplane. And so that's the route we went, and it is the perfect engine for this airplane.
That's awesome. Do you find that with the extra horsepower, it's much torqueier as far as on takeoff or landing?
Oh, absolutely. It when you lay into the throttle, it just jumps off the ground. It really does. It's actually the 85 stroker engine uses 0200 pistons and a crankshaft. So it's rated 85, but it actually dynos at about 114. So that's a big difference from 65. And on 65, as you know, Brandon, you have to have 2,300 RPM in your climb to actually turn to make 65 horsepower. And most of us can't do that. So it's a big difference in horsepower.
I imagine it is. Imagine it is. That's really great. So tell me a little bit about your experience with the Marion Fly-In Cruising. And before you start, let me tell you mine. So how I came to know it. It was about 15 years ago, and a friend and I were flying along. I don't remember where we had gone, but we were in a 172, and we're coming over Marion, and he looked down and he said, "Holy smokes." He says, "Look at all those airplanes down there." And so I looked down, and sure enough, there were airplanes everywhere. And we got on the frequency, and there were people flying. We thought initially it was an air show. And we kind of panicked for a moment that maybe we were in the wrong spot. But then we got on the frequency, and sure enough, there was all kinds of people in the pattern. So we had to go check it out, and dropped in there, and we were just floored with what all was there. And it was actually, that was the year that maybe they did it multiple years, but the hybrid fuel aerobatic team flew that year. And that was a lot of fun. So that my first experience with Marion Flying was a complete accident. And it was just wonderful. But tell me about how it started and your history with it.
Well, it began in 1991. Brandon, we had a daughter in the high school band, and they were looking for a fundraiser. And we had attended a few band booster meetings, and they were just all kinds of ideas came up. And I've always had an interest in not only old airplanes, but old vehicles. I also own a 1956 Ford F-100, and I kind of got a thing for original. I'm a second owner, and this is an original, all original vehicle. So after several meetings, I'm sitting there, and honestly, it just dropped in my brain. It just was an idea that came. I thought, what if we invite a few airplanes and get some old cars out there, and maybe we can have a fly-in cruise-in. And that's where the term came up. It was just an idea that I had. And so I presented it to the group, and they all looked at me kind of strangely. And this was in the spring of 1991. Anyway, to make a long story short, we got with the aviation board, and we got permission to do it. And on Saturday, a Labor Day weekend, we actually did our first one. And we learned a lot that first year.
I bet you did.
One thing we learned is we that first year we had pancakes, but we also served scrambled eggs. Okay. And we learned not to do scrambled eggs anymore. But never dreamed that after all these years, I have to say, I got together with a couple car guys, a guy named Mike Van Landingham and Larry Williams. And both these guys were big into vintage cars. So they put the word out, and that's where the vintage cars started coming from. And then I had, I called all my airplane friends, and they told theirs. And the first year went really, really well. And here, this coming fall, September 5th, hoping we can do this, it'll be the 30th anniversary Flying Cruise-In.
Isn't that amazing? 30 years.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that really is. So over the years, I've noticed there's always kind of a few feature airplanes, and sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, this is flying, and so weather and mechanicals are always part of the game. But in all the years that you've had various featured airplanes, which ones were your favorite?
Oh my goodness, lots of favorites. But I can't. Rather than favorites, I'll use highlights. Okay. People ask me, what's your favorite Flying Cruise-In? And I usually say the last one, the very last one. First of all, I hate to even talk about it, but we've been blessed with great weather. Yeah. We have went 29 Flying Cruise-Ins and never been weathered out. Now, we've had crosswinds and high winds and rain early and all those kind of things, but we've always managed to do it. Highlights, though, we've had the B-17 Yankee Lady in, and we have it scheduled for this year. We want to bring, it's from Ypsilanti. It's a very historical B-17, and we hope to get it back. We had a P-38 from Minnesota one year, and representing Robin Olds, General Robin Olds. It was Scat 7, and wow, that was a great thing to have a P-38 in Marion, Indiana. We've had the C-54 Spirit of Freedom, a number of times. It represents the Berlin Airlift. We've had a C-47, we've had a B-25, we've had TBM Avenger, a Corsair. Every year, now we're kind of, we're not an air show, we're a fly-in cruise-in, but we do feature a big airplane. And the way we do that is sponsors. Our event is free. It's free parking, free admittance, free registration. It's all free. The only thing you can spend money on is an airplane ride, perhaps an airplane ride in something. We always feature different things like a new standard biplane or something different, helicopter rides, and pancakes. And then it all centers around our all-you-can-eat pancake breakfast. We now own all of our equipment, and typically, Brandon, we'll serve 2,500 all-you-can-eat pancake breakfast.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Takes 100 volunteers, and we're kind of like Oshkosh. It's all done by volunteers, and we've done it for different reasons. Earlier, I told you we did it for the high school band for a number of years. We did it for some cancer organizations a few years, and now we are doing it for the Grant County Rescue Mission. And the Grant County Rescue Mission is a wonderful cause. They're tied in with the area-wide churches, and that's where we get our volunteers. It's really hard to find volunteers, and it takes 100 volunteers to put on a pancake breakfast, all you can eat, for 2,500 people.
Yeah, absolutely. If people want to volunteer, they want to help out with the event, how do they go about contacting you to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, contact myself or contact the Grant County Rescue Mission on our website, flyincruiseid.com. There's contact information.
Okay.
And so by all means, if you want to volunteer in any, we have lots of different jobs. If you want to volunteer, please contact us. We'll put you to work.
That's fantastic. And I understand that there are some local hotels and restaurants that help out, maybe not restaurants this year, I don't know, but that help out with the event too.
Absolutely. The Comfort Suites of Marion, Indiana is a big sponsor. And they, if you tell them you're flying in, if you want to fly in early on Friday evening, we certainly hope you would do that so you can be there early the next morning. The Comfort Suites, if you tell them you're coming in for the fly-in cruise-in, we have a special fly-in cruise-in rate. And usually every year we completely sell out that hotel.
Wow.
And we also, but they give us a very, very good rate every year. Just tell them I'm flying in or I'm cruising in for the flying cruise in, and they'll set you up. Comfort Suites in Marion, Indiana.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So let's switch gears a little bit to the Vintage Aircraft Association. You're on the board member with Vintage, and we see Vintage every year highlighted really in a great spot at Oshkosh, right there near what used to be Aeroshell Square. What is going on in the Vintage Aircraft Association now?
Well, thank you for asking. We're really proud of it. We call it the Rose Memorial Plaza. And this is where, and it's something I do, Vintage in Review. It's a program we do Monday through Friday, right in the center of the Vintage Aircraft Association. And we have created this beautiful village. We call it the Vintage Aircraft Association Village. It includes a used bookstore where people bring all kinds of aviation books, and you can bring them in and trade your books or donate your books. And all the proceeds from that benefit the Vintage Aircraft Association. We have completely renovated and remodeled the historic Red Barn, including our new Vintage Aircraft Association store, where you can get all kinds of, clothes, all kinds of clothes with the logo, the Vintage logo on. And that's all been done. And then in the hangar, we have the type clubs, all the type clubs, perhaps, like the Aranca Club, Taylorcraft Club, Stinson Club. They all sit in there all week, along with forums, and the forums specifically about vintage airplanes. You mentioned Bill Pancake. Bill Pancake's one of our popular speakers that we have every year. And so it's a place to visit. It's a place to relax. We have a big porch where you can sit there and sit on the porch and relax. And we have lemonade and popcorn, and it's just, we think, the friendliest place at Oshkosh.
Absolutely. So a lot of our folks and some of the members of our group are not yet vintage airplane people. A lot of them are grown up around more modern airplanes, and they don't really understand what a type club is. So what is a type club, and what's it for?
Well, type clubs for a particular airplane are invaluable. But a type club, I'll give you an example because I own the Aeronca Chief. The National Aeronca Association is a type club. And what it does, it's just a group of people. It's free to join. You don't have to own an Aeronca. You just have to be interested in an Aeronca to join it. There's a website, and there's also a Facebook page. And many of the other type clubs are like this, you know, like the J3 Cubs, the Taylor Crafts. I mentioned Stinson's, and the Short Wing Piper Club, Cessna 195s. They all have different type clubs. The wonderful thing about it is if you're interested in a particular airplane, let's just say an Aeronca Chief like myself, if you join the type club, then it's just a myriad of information you can get on that particular airplane. I mean, there's somebody on there that knows just every detail about every model. And so if you're restoring if you're restoring, flying, just maintenance, it gets you together with like-minded people. And so then these type clubs are available. You get to see the people that you communicate with throughout the year at Oshkosh. Each type club is represented there.
Like a family reunion.
It is. It really is. That's the beauty of it too, is you just meet the most interesting people from all walks of life in this airplane business, Brandon. And I think you know that. You just meet wonderful people.
You do. You know, we had one night in our champ, my wife and I, she gets the hairs on her neck when we talk this color, but we were heading down to dinner one night in Rochester. We'd been painting our bedroom all afternoon and decided we were done with that and it was time to go fly. So we took off and we're flying down to Rochester to get a hamburger. Yeah. And my wife says to me, because she's got a better nose than I do, she says, you know, Brandon, something smells kind of hot. And I said, really? Yeah. Well, it was about that time that I noticed the RPM was starting to fall off a little bit. So I thought, well, maybe we've got some carburetor ice. And I pulled the heat on, but it didn't make any difference. And it was about that time that I noticed the oil pressure needle start to wiggle a little bit. And I said, oh, okay. So I kind of turned around and I said, hey, hon, we're going to head back to the airport. I'm not sure what's going on, but we're just going to head on back just to make sure. And she said, is everything okay? I said, oh yeah, of course. Everything's fine. And so we're heading back. And sure enough, we had passed the crop dusters field about halfway. I knew of this gentleman. I really didn't know them, but I kind of knew the field. And I'm watching, of course, it's late fall and the corn is really tall. And I'm looking around for places to land. And it's really obvious that if we have to put it in a field, we're not going to keep it upright.
Yeah.
And, sure enough, we get towards this crop dusters field and the oil pressure is starting to fall off now. And we ended up landing there. And we rolled up. It was kind of a beautiful late fall evening. We rolled up to the hangar door and shut it down. And we got out. And his name is Mr. Eby. And he comes walking out of the hangar and sees the champ sitting there. And I said, hey, I'm really sorry to drop in on you, but we've got a little trouble. And he says, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, you know, it's running a little rough and we're starting to lose oil pressure. He says, well, let's fire it up and see what you got. So we actually started it up again and it ran. And we were able to run it up, but it wasn't making power well. It didn't sound good. And we shut it back off. And he says, well, hold on a minute. So he walked back into his hangar. And of course, this is their house, you know, at their house.
Interesting.
He walks back inside and next thing I know, the hangar doors are coming open. And he says, well, let's get it inside. And so, you know, sure enough, we're pushing the airplane into his hangar and they're pushing airplanes out of the way and making room for it. And we got it stuck in there. And his son, his name is Garrett, was out spraying at the time. And I knew that only because he'd mentioned it. But so, next thing I know, the cowls are off, and Mr. Eby and the guys are starting to look at the airplane. I mean, they don't know us. We didn't ask them to do anything. And this is just what you do when an airplane shows up and they've got an issue. And finally, Mr. Eby is looking at it and turns it over and says, "Oh, you don't have any compression at all on this one cylinder." He says, "Well, come on in. We're doing dinner at the hangar here tonight, so just join us." So my wife and I go inside, and the whole family's there, and the dog is there, and everybody, and there's all kinds of food. They said, "Oh, just join us for dinner." So we're having dinner with these folks, getting to know them, and I hear a spray airplane come back, and didn't think a whole lot of it. I just knew it was Garrett coming home, and probably about 20 minutes after that, maybe a little longer, Garrett comes walking into the front of the hangar where we're all eating dinner, and he's got a cylinder over his shoulder. And he walks right up to the table where we're eating dinner, and he plops the cylinder down, and there's a great big gaping hole in the middle of the cylinder. He says, "That's your problem."
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
And, they loaned us a car to take home for the night and everything. And my airplane sat in their hangar for a couple of weeks while we located another cylinder and all that. But my wife asked me on the drive home, she goes, is this how it always is? And I said, well, no, but this is how it's supposed to be. And,
I think in the vintage aircraft world, it really is that way. I mean, we hear stories similar to that from people all over the country. And there's just something special about people who like old airplanes, I think.
I think so. Well, that, and when we got all done with it, I asked Mr. Eby, I said, "Listen, can I pay you for keeping the airplane in the hangar?" Because it was certainly in his way. And he looked at me and says, "Well, would you do the same for us if we stopped at your place?" I said, "Well, of course I would." I said, "Then you're fine. Don't worry about it."
How about that? Wonderful. What a story. And lifelong friends now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and it sounds like you did better than just a hamburger that evening.
we did actually. It all worked out really well. So we got a good story out of it, and eventually overhauled the engine, and life is good. But we're still at 65 horse though, so we can't race.
Well, you have to jump in with me someday, and we'll have to show you it. I flew my Chief with 65 horsepower all over the country for years. Flew it to Sun and Fun 3 times from Marion, Indiana.
Wow.
and got along just fine. It's not about speed, but it's about climb, and it just woke up the airplane. But there's nothing wrong with those 65s at all. They do fine. It just that added little horsepower just gets you up and going. If you're in a short strip, I'm very fortunate. My wife loves to fly with me, and so we do fly together quite a bit. So we with the Chief, we have an 8-gallon auxiliary tank, so we can put 23 in it, 23 gallons of fuel, and just go. And so it's nice to have. It's a great STC that Bill Pankey.
That's fantastic. So remind me, what's the feature airplane at the fly-in this year?
This year, and by the way, September 5th is our date, Saturday of Labor Day weekend, for the 30th anniversary flying cruise in. We have 2 airplanes featured. We mentioned the B-17 Yankee Lady from Ypsilanti, Michigan, the Yankee Air Force B-17. We also have a B-25 scheduled, an airplane called God and Country. Okay. It's from Mount Pleasant, Texas. There's a museum down there, the Warbird Museum, and they've agreed to bring the airplane. And
will they be doing rides?
The B-25 will not be doing rides, but the B-17 will be doing rides. Yes. And I'll tell you, Brandon, we need to support these World War II airplanes.
Absolutely.
It's getting harder and harder to keep them maintained. Very expensive airplanes to maintain and insure. And so anytime you have an opportunity to see one, it's a real privilege. But the B-17 Yankee Lady will be offering ride experiences at the flying cruise.
And will they only be flying rides that day, or will it be for a couple of days after that?
They're coming in on Thursday evening.
Okay.
And they'll be taking rides the day before the actual flying cruise in on Friday, September 4th. and all day on the 5th. So if you want to beat the line, coming over on Friday afternoon would be a great opportunity, a great time to do it. And stay over in Marion and be there early in the morning for, those pancakes and that coffee. The earlier you get out there, they just taste better for some reason. And we love having you there. So.
Absolutely.
Besides the airplanes at the Flying Cruise-In, you'll see old cars, old motorcycles. We have these funny little vehicles called autocycles that look like airplanes, but they're actually enclosed motorcycles. We have them there. It's really an all-out transportation show. We have antique tractors. Typically, we'll have 50 to 60 antique tractors out there. We even had an old combine and an old corn picker at the Flying Cruise-In. Now, that was pretty unique. Yeah, it's all been restored. So,
awesome.
So there's something for everybody to see and do. As I said earlier, it's free parking, free admittance. And then all the proceeds, every single dime that's earned in the pancake breakfast goes to the Grant County Rescue Mission, a great organization. And again, the way that we bring the feature airplanes in, like the B-17, the B-25, are wonderful sponsors that we have in our area.
Any special tips for people flying in? Any special pattern or anything like that is going on?
Well, certainly check the NOTAMs before you arrive. We are uncontrolled. Unicom 122.7. Identifier is MZZ. Just fly a normal pattern. We have two runway. We have 1.5 and 3.3. Typically, we do not use on the fly-in day. We use 2.2 and 4. And runway 2.2 and 4 is 6,000 feet. So it's a great runway to recover airplanes. So, just see and avoid. No tight patterns. You want to monitor 1227, and as you fly in, just look out there. Because it's a flying, you expect a little more traffic, but it works. It works very, very well. We get you on the ground, and then we have many volunteers out there that will direct you to a parking place.
Great. Well, Ray, thank you for taking the time. We sure appreciate it. And pretty soon we'll have to get your chief up into Elkhart to visit Hangar 51.
Absolutely. And Brandon, thank you for all you do for general aviation. We appreciate it. We know you fly the high performance airplanes, but you still like these old vintage airplanes, and that's a great thing.
Well, it's kind of fun sometimes, the dichotomy of it. And I've had afternoons where, we'll come home from across the country. We'll fly home from Portland, Oregon, and 1,600 miles at 41,000 feet and do it in 4 hours. And put the airplane away and then go fly touch and goes in the Champ.
Oh, how great.
500 feet. And it's just great. It's just, there's nothing like flying an airplane where you can have your elbow out the window, and in the jet that gets really cold. So
well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. I want to mention one more time our website, flyincruisein.com. We also have a video series. We call it Fly In Cruise In Video Magazine. And you can find that on YouTube. YouTube.com/flyincruisein, or if you just go to and Google Flying Cruise In Marion, Indiana. If you just Google it, it'll bring up these websites. We have over 200 video clips of the past 30 years of the Flying Cruise-In, and if you've been there, you might even see yourself on there somewhere.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon.
Thanks, Ray.